June 6, 1944, the day the world would remember as DI began with chaos painted across the English Channel's morning sky. Lieutenant Commander Richard Thompson gripped the controls of his P-47 Thunderbolt, leading his squadron toward the beaches of Normandy when a terrifying realization struck him. American gunners below couldn't distinguish friend from foe in the swirling combat above. The invasion armada stretched beyond the horizon, the largest amphibious assault in human history unfolding beneath heavy clouds and smoke. Thompson watched in horror as streams of tracer fire erupted from Allied ships, tracking not toward German Luftwaffe fighters, but toward his own aircraft. His wingman, Captain James Morrison from Ohio, broke hard right as anti-aircraft shells exploded dangerously close, their black puffs appearing like deadly flowers blooming in the air. Within minutes, Morrison's voice crackled urgently over the radio, taking fire from our own ships. They think we're Krauts. This wasn't an isolated incident. Across the invasion zone, American, British, and Canadian pilots faced the same lethal confusion. The problem had roots stretching back months before D-Day, but on this crucial morning, it reached catastrophic proportions. Allied aircraft Thunderbolts, Mustangs, Spitfires, and Typhoons all bore similar profiles to their German counterparts when viewed from below against cloudy skies. Nervous gunners aboard destroyers, battleships, and transport vessels, already primed for German air attacks, fired at anything with wings that approached too quickly or at the wrong angle. Major General Louis H. Brereton, commanding the 9th Air Force, had anticipated this nightmare scenario. Throughout the spring of 1944, reports from training exercises in England revealed a disturbing pattern. During mock attacks on Allied convoys, ground crews and naval personnel consistently misidentified friendly aircraft. In one exercise off the Devon coast in April, simulated friendly fire accounted for hypothetical losses exceeding actual German capabilities. The statistics were damning. Recognition accuracy hovered around 60% under ideal conditions, dropping to barely 40% in combat situations involving stress, smoke, and rapid decision-making. According to documentation later archived in the National Archives and Records Administration in Washington, D.C., the Allied command had wrestled with aircraft identification since early 1943. British Air Vice Marshal Trafford Lemallory had convened multiple committees to address the issue, but solutions remained elusive. Paint schemes, silhouettes, and radio transponders all had limitations. German aircraft also carried various markings, and skilled Luftwaffe pilots had occasionally exploited Allied identification confusion by mimicking friendly approach patterns. But nothing prepared the Allied forces for the scale of friendly fire incidents on D-Day itself. Within the first 3 hours of daylight operations, at least 12 Allied aircraft fell to friendly anti-aircraft fire. Thompson watched 2 British Typhoons disintegrate under salvos from a destroyer that mistook their aggressive dive-bombing runs for enemy attacks. The pilots never had a chance to pull up, their aircraft simply ceasing to exist in bursts of orange flame and twisted metal. As Thompson's squadron completed their ground attack mission and turned for England, he counted only 9 aircraft of his original 12. One had fallen to German flak, but 2 others bore damage from Allied anti-aircraft guns. The recognition problem wasn't just costing aircraft, it was killing experienced pilots the Allies desperately needed for the sustained air campaign ahead. Something had to change, and it had to change immediately, or the friendly fire toll would eventually rival losses to the enemy. June 7, 1944 brought no relief from the previous day's identification nightmare. And if anything, the friendly fire crisis intensified as combat operations expanded across the Normandy beachhead. Colonel Francis Gabreski, one of America's top fighter aces, landed his Thunderbolt at Advanced Landing Ground. A one in France, with 6 fresh bullet holes in his tail section, every one from American sources. The beach defenses remained on hair-trigger alert. German aircraft had attempted several bombing runs during the night, and exhausted anti-aircraft crews now fired at virtually any aircraft that appeared suddenly. Through the morning mist rolling off the channel, Captain Robert Johnson, another ace with the 56th Fighter Group, reported that ground fire from Allied positions had become more dangerous than Luftwaffe fighters. His assessment, recorded in his unit's war diary, now housed at the Air Force Historical Research Agency at Maxwell Air Force Base, Alabama, noted that pilots were beginning to avoid altitude support missions over Allied positions, fearing friendly fire more than enemy anti-aircraft guns. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of Allied Forces, received increasingly alarming reports at his headquarters in Portsmouth, England. Intelligence officers estimated that between 15 and 20 Allied aircraft had been destroyed or damaged by friendly fire in just 48 hours, a loss rate approaching 5% of available tactical aircraft. This figure didn't account for close calls that forced pilots to abort missions or the psychological impact on aviators, who now approached their own forces with dread. The naval component of the friendly fire problem proved particularly deadly. Aboard the USS Nevada, a battleship providing offshore bombardment support, Ensign Thomas Whitaker commanded an anti-aircraft gun crew that had fired on at least 6 aircraft on D-Day. Only later did recognition officers confirm that 5 of those 6 had been Allied planes. Whitaker's experience was typical, not exceptional. Naval doctrine emphasized aggressive air defense, better to shoot first and identify later than allow a German bomber to damage the ship. This doctrine, perfectly logical in Pacific naval battles against Japanese aircraft, created havoc in the crowded skies over Normandy, where Allied aircraft vastly outnumbered German planes. British Air Marshal Arthur Tedder, Eisenhower's deputy, pushed for an emergency conference on June 7 to address the crisis. Representatives from the Royal Air Force, United States Army Air Forces, Allied naval forces, and ground anti-aircraft units gathered at Stanmore in northwest London. The mood was grim. Wing Commander Hugh Dundas of the Royal Air Force described watching a Spitfire flown by his friend squadron leader James McConnell explode after taking fire from British anti-aircraft guns near Cannes. McConnell had survived 3 years of combat against the Luftwaffe, only to die at the hands of his own forces. The conference participants reviewed every proposed solution from the previous 18 months. Standard identification markings, the white invasion stripes painted on fuselage, had helped somewhat, but proved insufficient. Aircraft moving at high speeds, viewed from below against varied backgrounds, remained difficult to identify positively. Radio protocols requiring pilots to announce their positions had failed due to radio congestion and the chaos of combat. Colored smoke signals and flares added confusion rather than clarity, as German pilots had begun mimicking Allied signals. Major John T. Godfrey, an intelligence officer with the 8th Air Force's 4th Fighter Group, proposed a radical solution during the conference. His suggestion, initially met with skepticism, involved adding highly visible black and white stripes to aircraft wings in addition to the fuselage markings already applied. The wing's surface area, he argued, provided much more visible identification space than fuselages, especially when aircraft were viewed from below or at angles. The distinctive pattern would be unmistakable, even in poor visibility or at high speeds. Air Vice Marshal LeMallory seized on Godfrey's proposal. The wing striping concept had actually been tested on a small scale by some RAF squadrons in early 1944, but never implemented systematically. The Stanmore Conference attendees debated through the afternoon of June 7th, weighing the time required to paint thousands of aircraft against the continuing losses to friendly fire. The decision was made. All Allied aircraft operating over the invasion area would receive the distinctive black and white wing stripes immediately. June 7, 1940, as twilight descended over southern England, an extraordinary order rippled through every Allied airfield from Cornwall to Kent. Ground crews, exhausted from supporting continuous combat operations, received instructions that seemed impossible. Paint alternating black and white stripes on both wings of every single aircraft before dawn. No exceptions, no delays. At RAF Tangmere in Sussex, squadron leader Michael Crossley read the teletype message with disbelief. His squadron of 24 Spitfires had flown 3 missions that day, and mechanics were already working through the night on maintenance. Now they faced an additional task that would require thousands of gallons of paint and hundreds of man-hours. Chief Mechanic Sergeant William Hayes calculated quickly. Each aircraft needed approximately 40 square feet of wing surface painted in precise alternating stripes. For the entire squadron, that meant painting nearly 1,000 square feet, and Tangmere housed 6 squadrons. Similar scenes unfolded at every Allied airbase. At West Hampnet, home to Canadian Spitfire squadrons, Wing Commander Lloyd Chadbourne mobilized every available person, including pilots, cooks, and administrative staff. The specifications were precise. 5 alternating black and white stripes, each 18 inches wide, wrapping around both wings from root to tip. According to records maintained by the Canadian War Museum in Ottawa, Chadburn's crews worked with such efficiency that all aircraft were marked and ready for dawn patrol. The logistical challenge was staggering. Paint supplies had to be rushed from depots across southern England. At Advanced Landing Ground B2 in Normandy, where some fighter squadrons had already deployed 2 hastily prepared strips near the beaches, ground crews improvised with whatever materials were available. Captain Harold Comstock's maintenance team used paint meant for ground vehicles, thinning it with aviation fuel to make it spread further and dry faster. The results were crude but effective. The stripes didn't need to be beautiful, only visible. At Biggin Hill, one of Fighter Command's most famous stations, Flight Lieutenant Geoffrey Wellham helped paint his own Spitfire. The task brought back memories of his early war years, but this felt different, more desperate, more urgent. As he applied white paint to black primer in the harsh glare of maintenance floodlights, Wellham reflected on the bitter irony. They were at war with Germany, yet Allied forces were shooting down their own aircraft with disturbing regularity. The stripes represented more than identification markings. They were literally the difference between life and death. The 9th Air Force, operating from bases in central England, faced perhaps the greatest challenge. With over 1,500 fighters and fighter bombers under its command, the painting operation required military precision to complete in time. Major General Elwood Pete Quesada, commanding the 9th Fighter Command, personally visited bases throughout the night, ensuring the work progressed on schedule. At one point, he grabbed a paintbrush himself at an airfield near Reading, telling startled mechanics that rank didn't matter when Allied pilots were dying. Technical challenges emerged quickly. Paint had to adhere properly to aluminum surfaces, dry fast enough for morning operations, and remain visible after exposure to oil, fuel, and exhaust. At some bases, the paint wouldn't stick to aircraft that had just returned from missions, their surfaces too hot or contaminated. Crews learned to wash wings with solvent first, a step that added precious time to an already compressed schedule. At RAF Hornchurch, innovative mechanics used chalk to mark stripe boundaries before painting, speeding the process considerably. This technique spread by Stewbase through unofficial channels as ground crews shared solutions. Weather added another complication. A light rain began falling across southeastern England around midnight, threatening to ruin fresh paint jobs. At Manston, crews rigged canvas awnings over aircraft parking areas, creating impromptu shelters. At Middle Wallop, ground personnel moved aircraft into any available hangar space, painting them assembly line style before rolling them back out for the next batch. As documented in the official history compiled by the United States Air Force Historical Division, more than 3,000 Allied aircraft received the distinctive invasion stripes during that single night. The operation represented one of the largest coordinated maintenance efforts of the entire war, involving an estimated 20,000 ground personnel working simultaneously across hundreds of locations. Paint consumption exceeded 50,000 gallons, and countless brushes wore out completely during the marathon painting session. June 8, 1944, arrived with unusual clarity over the English Channels, scattered clouds at 5,000 feet, visibility extending for miles. This was exactly the type of morning that had previously spelled disaster for Allied aircraft recognition. Lieutenant Thomas Hayes led his flight of 4 freshly striped PFT-1 Mustangs toward the Normandy coast just after 6 o'clock, wondering if the previous night's exhausting paint job would make any difference. Hayes noticed the stripes immediately affected how he perceived other aircraft. The bold black and white bands on his wingman's aircraft stood out dramatically, visible even at distances where aircraft types remained ambiguous. Banking over the beachhead at 15,000 feet, he could identify striped Allied aircraft below him with unprecedented ease. The pattern was unmistakable. No German aircraft carried anything similar. The real test came 15 minutes into the patrol. Hayes's flight descended to 8,000 feet to investigate what appeared to be German fighters near Cannes. As they approached, Hayes recognized them as P-47 Thunderbolts from the contrast patterns on their wings, visible long before he could make out other identifying features. Without the stripes, he might have closed to dangerous proximity before recognizing them, potentially triggering a friendly fire engagement in the confusion. Commander Harold Bauer, aboard the destroyer USS Barton, providing fire support off Omaha Beach, experienced the recognition improvement from the opposite perspective. When Allied fighters appeared overhead that morning, the distinctive wing stripes were visible even from the ship's pitching deck. For the first time since D-Day, Bauer felt confident distinguishing Allied from enemy aircraft. His standing orders to shoot any unidentified aircraft approaching the fleet could now be executed with discrimination rather than panic. The transformation was remarkable, Bauer later recorded in his action report, now preserved at the Naval History and Heritage Command in Washington, D.C., where previously we fired on anything that moved quickly or came from unexpected angles. We could now identify friendly aircraft with confidence from 2 miles distance. The wing stripes were visible even through morning haze and smoke from shore bombardment. British anti-aircraft units reported similar results. Lieutenant Colonel James Williams, commanding a mobile anti-aircraft regiment supporting British Second Army operations near Bayeux, it's noted that his gun crews held their fire on 9 aircraft that morning, all correctly identified as friendly due to wing stripes. In the previous 2 days, his regiment had fired on 7 Allied aircraft, destroying 2. The psychological relief among his men was palpable. Gunners who had been tormented by the possibility of killing their own pilots now operated with appropriate confidence. The Luftwaffe's response to the stripes came sooner than expected. By mid-morning of June 8th, German reconnaissance aircraft had photographed the new markings. And intelligence officers at Luftflotte 3 headquarters near Paris quickly understood their purpose. Oberst Joseph Pips Priller, one of Germany's most experienced fighter pilots, immediately recognized both the problem the Allies faced and the solution the stripes represented. German pilots began reporting the striped aircraft by late morning. Feldwebel Heinz-Nock, flying a Messerschmitt Bf-19 over the invasion area, noted in his combat diary that Allied aircraft now displayed zebra stripes that made them annoyingly easy to identify, even at great distances. This observation confirmed that if German pilots could easily identify Allied aircraft by the stripes, Allied gunners would have similar success, intended what the marking system intended. The statistical impact became clear remarkably quickly. The Allied Air Force's operations staff, monitoring friendly fire incidents through continuous reporting from all units, noted a dramatic decrease in fratricide cases beginning June 8th, where the previous 2 days had averaged 8 to 10 friendly fire shootdowns daily. June 8th recorded only 2 confirmed incidents, both occurring in the early morning before full light, involving aircraft that had not yet received the stripe markings due to maintenance delays. Squadron leader Pierre Clostermann, a French pilot flying with RAF 6 SO2 Squadron, described the psychological impact. The stripes changed everything. We had been subconsciously tensing every time we approached our own lines, expecting fire from below. Now we could focus on the enemy. The mental relief was as significant as the physical safety the markings provided. By noon on June 8th, General Brereton's staff compiled preliminary statistics that would eventually become one of the war's most striking success stories in rapid problem-solving. The marking program had effectively eliminated friendly fire incidents involving properly striped aircraft. In the 72 hours following implementation, the friendly fire loss rate dropped approximately 90%. June 10, 1944 brought an unexpected development that tested Allied aerial identification procedures in ways no one had anticipated. First Lieutenant Robert Hagen, flying combat air patrol over the American sector, spotted a P-47 Thunderbolt with invasion stripes behaving erratically near St. Lay. As Hagen closed for a better look, the aircraft suddenly opened fire on a formation of American C-47 transport planes, dropping supplies to ground units. Hagen's combat report, filed that evening and now archived at the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, revealed a chilling truth. The aircraft was a captured American P-47, painted in German markings but bearing approximations of the invasion stripes. The Luftwaffe was attempting to exploit the very identification system designed to prevent friendly fire. Hagen pursued and shot down the imposter, but the incident sparked immediate concern at Allied headquarters. Intelligence officer Major William Winterbotham, working with RAF intelligence at Bletchley Park, had actually predicted this possibility. German forces had captured numerous Allied aircraft throughout the war, repairing and sometimes flying them for evaluation purposes. A few even served in combat roles, though usually without elaborate disguises. The invasion stripes, however, offered an opportunity too tempting for German intelligence to ignore. By painting stripes on captured aircraft, the Luftwaffe could potentially penetrate Allied formations, gather intelligence, or cause chaos. The threat materialized across multiple incidents over the following days. Near Caen, British gunners reported a Spitfire with invasion stripes that strafed a Royal Engineers unit, killing 3 soldiers before disappearing. Investigation revealed no Allied Spitfire squadrons operated in that area during the time frame. German records captured later in the war confirmed that Versace-Verband, OKL, a special Luftwaffe unit that operated captured Allied aircraft, had painted invasion stripes on at least 4 British and American fighters. General Carl Toohey Spots, commanding United States Strategic Air Forces in Europe, faced a dilemma. The invasion stripes had dramatically reduced friendly fire, saving hundreds of aircraft and countless lives, but if the Germans could effectively mimic the markings, the entire system's value diminished. Removing the stripes would return to the previous nightmare of fratricide. Keeping them unchanged invited German exploitation. Air Chief Marshal Trafford Lamellery called another emergency conference on June 12 to address the emerging threat. Commander Roland Beament proposed a solution: modify the stripe pattern regularly. Changing dimensions, colors, or configurations on a schedule known only to Allied forces. This approach would force Germans to continuously gather new intelligence about current markings, limiting their ability to maintain effective disguises. The proposal faced practical objections immediately. Painting thousands of aircraft repeatedly would consume enormous resources and reduce operational availability. Furthermore, rapid changes risked confusing Allied personnel, potentially reintroducing the very recognition problems the stripes solved. Squadron leader Hugh Dundas offered a counter-argument from operational experience. German aircraft rarely survived long enough in Allied-controlled airspace for their disguises to matter significantly. The real solution, he suggested, was better pilot discipline and situational awareness. Group Captain Douglas Bader, the legless RAF ace, contributed a pragmatic perspective that ultimately shaped Allied policy. Bader noted that German-operated captured aircraft, while a concern, represented a minuscule threat compared to the friendly fire problem the stripes had solved. Statistics supported his view. In the week following stripe implementation, German aircraft disguised with false markings accounted for perhaps 5 or 6 incidents. Meanwhile, friendly fire incidents had dropped from approximately 50 in the first 3 days of the invasion to fewer than 10 in the entire week following stripe adoption. We must maintain perspective, Bader argued at the conference. Yes, the Germans can paint stripes on captured aircraft, but they cannot maintain a fleet of them. Every hour a captured aircraft flies risks its loss. The Luftwaffe's fighter strength is devoted to defending the Reich, not maintaining a few disguised aircraft for harassment missions. Our stripes work. Let's not abandon a successful system because the enemy scored a few clever tricks. The conference ultimately endorsed Bader's reasoning with modifications. Instead of frequent pattern changes, Allied forces implemented enhanced verification procedures. Fighter pilots received briefings about the captured aircraft threat, with emphasis on verifying behavior rather than relying solely on visual identification. Any aircraft with invasion stripes acting unusually, flying alone when doctrine required formations, appearing in unexpected locations, or approaching friendly units aggressively warranted immediate suspicion. Naval forces added radar correlation to visual identification. Ships tracking aircraft on radar could now cross-reference electronic contacts with visual observations, identifying aircraft that appeared without proper radar signature patterns. This multi-layered approach proved effective. On June 14th, destroyer USS Hambleton identified a friendly aircraft as hostile based on its radar signature. But despite the plane displaying invasion stripes, fighter cover shot it down before it reached the fleet. June 20th, 1944 marked 2 full weeks since the invasion stripes first appeared on Allied aircraft, and operational research units began compiling comprehensive data about the marking system's effectiveness. The statistics told a story that exceeded even optimistic projections and would eventually establish that the invasion stripes is one of the war's most successful rapid interventions. Air Commodore Sidney Buffton, Director of Bomber Operations at the Air Ministry, received the first comprehensive analysis from the Operational Research Section at High Wycombe. The document, methodically compiled by statisticians who had tracked every reported aircraft engagement, revealed that friendly fire incidents involving properly marked aircraft had decreased 94%. Compared to the 3-day period immediately following the invasion. Put another way, the invasion stripes had prevented an estimated 500 aircraft losses to friendly fire in just 14 days. The human cost prevented was equally dramatic. Each aircraft carried at least one pilot, with some bombers carrying crews of 4 to 10 men. Conservative estimates suggested the stripes had saved between 500 and 700 Allied airmen from death or injury at the hands of their own forces. These men remained in service, continuing to fly missions that advanced the Allied cause. The cumulative impact on air operations was immeasurable. Experienced pilots were the most valuable resource any Air Force possessed, more precious than aircraft themselves. Colonel Curtis LeMay, commanding the 3rd Air Division of the 8th Air Force, examined the data with his characteristic analytical precision. LeMay had built his reputation on ruthlessly efficient bombing tactics, always focused on quantifiable results. The invasion stripes impressed him precisely because they delivered measurable success. We achieved a 94% reduction in a critical problem with a solution that cost paint and labor. He noted in correspondence with General Henry Hop Arnold, Chief of the Army Air Forces. This is exactly the type of practical problem-solving we need more of. Naval forces reported similarly impressive results. The 5th Fleet's action reports, compiled by Rear Admiral Alan Kirk, documented the transformation in fleet air defense effectiveness. In the war's first 48 hours after D-Day, nervous naval anti-aircraft crews had fired on Allied aircraft 137 times, scoring hits on 32 planes, and destroying or seriously damaging 15. In the 2 weeks following stripe implementation, naval guns fired on Allied aircraft only 19 times, with just 3 hits and 0 shoot-downs. The stripes worked precisely as intended. British Anti-Aircraft Command provided perhaps the most striking data. Lieutenant General Frederick Pyle, commanding Anti-Aircraft Command, reported that ground-based anti-aircraft batteries had effectively ceased firing on Allied aircraft after June 8th, where previous daily reports routinely included friendly fire incidents. The post-stripe period showed almost complete elimination of these events. British gunners, who had endured tremendous psychological stress from the possibility of killing their own pilots, expressed profound relief at the improved identification capability. The success extended beyond preventing friendly fire. Allied pilots reported increased confidence operating over friendly territory, knowing their own forces could identify them reliably. This psychological benefit translated to operational improvements. Pilots flying ground attack missions could concentrate fully on their targets rather than worrying about fire from below. Close air support became more effective as aircraft could operate at lower altitudes without fear of friendly anti-aircraft fire. Fighter pilots could pursue German aircraft over Allied positions without hesitation. German perspective on the stripes' effectiveness came from captured Luftwaffe personnel. Major Heinrich Erler, a German fighter ace, shot down and captured near Falaise on June 18th, provided frank assessment during interrogation. The stripes' major aircraft unmistakable, Erler told interrogators. We could identify them as easily as you could. It meant we could no longer hope that confusion might protect us when intercepting your formations. Every aircraft we encountered could be immediately classified as friend or enemy. This observation revealed an unintended benefit of the invasion stripes. While designed to help Allied forces distinguish their own aircraft, the markings also eliminated any ambiguity for German pilots. Removing any advantage the Luftwaffe might gain from confusion, combat became cleaner, more decisive, exactly what Allied air superiority required. Air Chief Marshal Arthur Tedder, reviewing the compiled statistics at SHAEF headquarters, recognized the broader implications. The invasion stripe success demonstrated that complex military problems sometimes yielded to simple solutions when implemented decisively across entire organizations. The key factors were rapid decision-making, comprehensive implementation, and willingness to embrace unconventional approaches. The paint itself, thousands of gallons of black and white pigment applied in simple patterns, represented minimal cost compared to the value of aircraft and pilots saved. From a purely economic perspective, the return on investment was extraordinary. Each Allied fighter cost approximately $50,000 to produce. Each bomber cost 10 times that amount. The invasion stripes, requiring perhaps $5 worth of paint per aircraft, prevented losses valued at millions of dollars in equipment alone. not accounting for the incalculable value of experienced air crews. July 1st, 1944, saw the invasion stripes becoming more than just an emergency identification measure. They transformed into a symbol of the Allied invasion itself. Newspaper correspondents like Ernie Pyle, reporting from the front lines in Normandy, frequently mentioned the distinctive black and white bands in their dispatches. For soldiers fighting in the hedgerows below, the striped aircraft represented friendly air support, a reminder that Allied air superiority protected them from German attack. The stripes also became a matter of unit pride. Fighter squadrons began adding subtle variations while maintaining the basic patterns light. Differences in stripe width or exact positioning that allowed pilots to identify their own squadron's aircraft at a distance. These variations remained within the standard design parameters, but gave individual units a sense of identity. The 4th Fighter Group, one of the 8th Air Force's most decorated units, carefully ensured their stripes measured exactly 18 inches, not the 17 or 19 inches that appeared on some hastily painted aircraft. Technical refinements continued throughout July. Paint durability became a concern as aircraft accumulated flight hours. The original quick-drying paint applied during that frantic night of June 7th began showing wear from constant exposure to weather, high-speed flight, and combat damage. Maintenance crews developed improved paint formulations that lasted longer while adding minimal weight. At some bases, ground crews experimented with different application methods, including spray painting rather than brushwork, which produced more consistent results. The stripe's visibility from different angles and lighting conditions received systematic study. Flight Lieutenant David Cox, a Royal Air Force officer with a background in industrial design, conducted experiments photographing striped aircraft under various conditions. His research, presented to RAF Fighter Command in mid-July, demonstrated that the black and white pattern remained recognizable across an impressive range of scenarios, from head-on approaches at dawn to belly-up passes at dusk. Only under certain combinations of cloud cover and aircraft angle did the stripes become difficult to distinguish, and even then they performed better than any previous identification system. Ground attack aircraft received special attention regarding stripe application. 47 Thunderbolts and Republic P-38, Lightnings operating in the fighter-bomber role, flew lower and slower than pure fighters, making them more vulnerable to both enemy and friendly ground fire. These aircraft received enhanced stripe patterns, with some units adding stripes to tail surfaces in addition to wings. The 19th Tactical Air Command, supporting General George Patton's Third Army, made striped tail surfaces standard for all its close air support aircraft after several near fratricide incidents in late June. British and American forces began coordinating stripe standards more formally. While both nations used the basic 5-stripe pattern, minor differences in implementation had emerged organically. A joint committee established in mid-July worked to standardize specifications across all Allied air forces. Royal Canadian Air Force squadrons, Free French aviation units, Polish fighter wings, and other Allied contingents all adopted the refined standards, ensuring complete uniformity across the coalition. The standardization effort extended to new aircraft arriving from factories in Britain and America. By late July, manufacturers began applying invasion stripes at the factory before delivery, saving operational units from having to paint aircraft immediately upon receipt. Boeing's factories in Seattle, North American Aviation's plants in Inglewood, California, and Supermarin's works in England all integrated stripe painting into their production processes. The stripes became a standard feature rather than a field modification. German propaganda attempted to exploit the stripes, claiming they revealed Allied desperation and poor training. Radio broadcasts from Berlin mocked Allied forces for needing kindergarten recognition markings to identify their own aircraft. Joseph Goebbels, Reich Minister of Propaganda, personally approved broadcasts suggesting the stripes proved Allied air forces were staffed by poorly trained pilots who couldn't recognize different aircraft types. These propaganda efforts backfired. They merely confirmed to Allied personnel that the stripes bothered the Germans, validating their effectiveness. From a historical perspective, the stripes represented something unprecedented. Never before had a military identification system been designed, approved, and implemented across thousands of aircraft in such compressed time frame. The entire process from recognizing the problem to deploying the solution took barely 72 hours. Traditional military bureaucracy would have required months of studies, committee meetings, and gradual implementation. The emergency conditions of D-Day forced rapid decision-making that might otherwise have been impossible. As July progressed and Allied forces broke out of Normandy, beginning the campaign across France, the invasion stripes remained standard equipment on all tactical aircraft. They would continue to serve through the liberation of Paris in August, the failed Operation Market Garden in September, and the bitter Ardennes fighting during the Battle of the Bulge that winter. Throughout these operations, the stripes continued, preventing friendly fire incidents, their value proven beyond any doubt. September 1st, 1944, found Allied armies racing across France toward the German border. And the distinctive black and white invasion stripes remained prominently displayed on virtually every Allied aircraft in the European theater. What had begun as an emergency measure now represented standard operational practice, validated by months of combat experience. The final accounting of the stripes' impact wouldn't be compiled until after the war. But operational research units continuously tracked their effectiveness. By September, the data showed that friendly fire losses had decreased approximately 96% compared to pre-stripe levels, meaning that for every 100 aircraft that would have been lost to fratricide without the stripes, only 4 were lost with them. This translated to thousands of aircraft and aircrews saved over the campaign's duration. Group Captain James "Johnny" Johnson, the Royal Air Force's top-scoring fighter ace against the Luftwaffe, reflected on the stripes' significance in his combat diary. The simple black and white bands saved more Allied lives than any single tactical innovation of the campaign, Johnson wrote. They allowed us to fight the enemy rather than accidentally fighting each other. In war, clarity is everything: clarity of purpose, clarity of command, and clarity of identification. The invasion stripes provided that last essential element. The stripes evolved subtly as the campaign progressed. By September, many units began removing the fuselage bands while retaining the wing stripes. As combat experience showed, the wing markings alone provided sufficient identification, while fuselage bands made aircraft slightly more visible to German gunners. This modification spread informally through fighter groups until it became unofficial standard practice. Bombers generally retained both wing and fuselage stripes due to their larger size and different tactical employment. Technical analysis continued refining understanding of what made the stripes effective. Dr. Kenneth Craik, a British psychologist studying human factors in aircraft recognition, published findings in September 1940 for explaining the cognitive psychology behind the stripes' success, according to documentation maintained by the Imperial War Museum in London. Craik demonstrated that the high contrast pattern registered in human visual perception faster than shape-based recognition, especially under stress conditions. The stripes literally triggered faster identification responses in human brains than trying to recognize aircraft silhouettes. This research had implications beyond World War II. The principles, validated by invasion stripe, success using high contrast patterns for rapid identification, implementing simple solutions to complex problems, and the value of decisive leadership in crisis situations would influence military thinking for decades. The stripes became a case study in effective problem-solving under pressure, taught at staff colleges and military academies worldwide. The broader lesson of the invasion stripes reached beyond military applications. In any large organization facing a crisis, the D-Day identification solution demonstrated that rapid, comprehensive action could solve problems that seemed intractable through conventional approaches. The willingness to mobilize thousands of personnel for a single night's work, the decisive leadership that approved an unconventional solution, and the effective execution that delivered results exemplified organizational effectiveness at its highest level. By the time Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, the invasion stripes had prevented an estimated 2,000 friendly fire incidents that would otherwise have occurred based on pre-June 19-40-4 loss rates. Each prevented incident represented saved lives, preserved equipment, and maintained combat effectiveness. The total impact of that June 7th decision to paint stripes made in a conference room at Stanmore and executed by thousands of ground crew across England cascaded through the entire campaign. Post-war analysis by both American and British military historians consistently ranked the invasion stripes among the most effective tactical innovations of the European campaign. The solution's elegance lay in its simplicitinal, complex technology. No expensive equipment, just paint applied in a distinctive pattern that human eyes could process rapidly under stress. In an era of increasingly sophisticated warfare, the stripes proved that sometimes the simplest solutions worked best. The legacy extended into the jet age and beyond. Modern aircraft recognition systems still employ high-contrast visual markings for situations where electronic identification proves insufficient. The distinctive paint schemes on civilian aircraft, the bright colors on rescue helicopters, and the high-visibility markings on military aircraft all owe intellectual debt to the principles validated by World War II invasion stripes. Veterans who flew with the stripes remembered them with particular appreciation. At reunions decades later, former pilots would recall the psychological relief the markings provided, the ability to operate over friendly forces without constant fear of fire from below. Some veterans kept photographs of their striped aircraft as prized possessions, reminders of when a simple pattern of black and white paint made the difference between life and death. The story of the invasion stripes ultimately represents a triumph of practical problem-solving. Faced with a crisis that was killing their own people, Allied leadership made a decision, implemented it comprehensively, and achieved immediate results. The 500 planes saved in the first hours represented not just preserved hardware, but preserved lives. Pilots, bombardiers, navigators, gunners, and crew who went on to contribute to final victory. Those men flew additional missions, pressed the campaign forward, and many survived to return home when the war ended. The black and white stripes that appeared so suddenly on June 8, 1944, and remained throughout the European campaign, became one of the most recognizable symbols of Allied air power. They represented not just identification markings, but evidence that even in war's chaos, clear thinking and decisive action could save thousands of lives. That night, when 20,000 ground crew painted 3,000 aircraft remains, one of military history's most remarkable examples of rapid organizational response to crisis, and the results validated every brushstroke.